comfortable with that. The other part of this chapter is continuing kind of the conversation or talk about the cylinders, the tanks, some of the safety stuff, and I think I mentioned a little bit of safety stuff, but I tried to save it for this part to really go over safety. So, organizations, who you're going to have to know. When we talked about in part 1 about who's responsible for regulating the transport of cylinders, the testing of the cylinders, who make sure that the cylinder integrity of that steel or that metal will hold, what federal agency is responsible for that? The DOT, Department of Transportation. Now, a couple other organizations deal with cylinder safety, not testing like the DOT does, but cylinder safety and guidelines or recommendations. Now, the National Fire Protection Agency is one of them. The other would be the Compressed Gas Association. So make sure you recognize these and don't confuse these people with the DOT. Okay, because you know when I ask the question, I'm going to have DOT on there and I'll have one of these people on here as well, just to try to trick you or just to try to throw you off. So again, DOT, the testing of the cylinder. I think it's easy to say transport of the cylinder because it is Department of Transportation. But the testing of those cylinders to make sure the cylinder integrity is solid. It's not going to explode on us or because the steel wall of the tank is weakened. That's the DOT. Now, safety guidelines, the National Fire Protection Agency and the Compressed Gas Association. All right, so let's talk about some cylinder safety stuff. All right, cylinders. When we store them, they should be stored either in racks or chained to a wall. I don't know if you can even see this picture very well, but chained to a wall to prevent what from happening? Them falling over, okay? If they were to fall over, I'm not saying I don't believe that steel, that metal will crack. I think it'll withstand the fall. But the weakest part of these is those attachments here at the top. If that thing was to fall off, if that was to fall down right now and slam down on this table as it proceeds to hit the floor, if that piece breaks off, shears off, whatever the case may be, then all that gas in that tank is going to try to find a place to get out, and the tank itself, that heavy steel metal tank, is going to take off the opposite direction at hundreds of miles an hour, busting through walls, busting through concrete, busting through brick until it's empty. I don't know if you ever remember that show, and now that I'm saying it, I can't think of the name of the top of my head. It was on one of those Discovery channels, the Mythbusters, that's the name of it, Mythbusters. They actually did a Mythbusters challenge, specifically breaking open a tank, and they picked one of these big ones, breaking off the regulator on this tank to see what it would do. And it did take off. They had purposely aimed it at a brick wall, and it did take off and did go through that brick wall like a missile. So we're talking about safety, and I don't want you to be afraid of these tanks, but respect the tanks. And when you see somebody kind of misbehaving with the tank or something like that, they can be dangerous if they're not properly cared for, not properly handled. And I don't think anybody goes through the level of instruction or training that we do to make sure we can understand how safe to keep these tanks and to be careful and to be cautious. Cylinders should be stored away from combustible materials, away from sources of heat. Store at temperatures at least less than 125 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, this could be someone in the home who you're doing some instruction. Hey, when the tanks arrive, don't store them right next to the fireplace, you know, as a source of heat, those sort of things. Store flammable gases separately from gases that support combustion. And it's a good idea to separate full from empty tanks. Because imagine we're working in a hospital and we just have a smattering of tanks over there in the corner, and we have an emergency we're trying to deal with and we need a full tank. I don't have the time to go through and figure out empty, full, half used, half full, whatever the case may be. So it's a good idea to store them separately, and that's a recommended guideline is, hey, when you're empty, put the empties all together. Put the full ones all together. Maybe the ones that have some gas, they're not empty yet, nor are they full. Maybe put those in a special spot so we know, okay, if we need it for a very brief period of time, there's a little bit of gas left in there. We could still use it and empty that tank. But if it's an emergency, then obviously I want to get a full tank. I want that oxygen to last as long as possible. And if I think, hey, we may be going somewhere for a while, the transport may take a while, then grab 2. You can always grab extras. This is on the big tanks about keeping the cylinder cap in place if it's not in use. So this is an H tank. An H tank's about yay tall, a little over 5 feet tall. And this heavy piece normally stays on top. It actually kind of screws into place. Again, it protects the top, so if the tank was to accidentally fall over, this is not going to break or this is not going to shear, because it has this same material that's made out of that the tank's made out of will be here. And again, sometimes it's a little difficult when you go to take it off. You really have to twist, because there's threads there, and you really have to twist that metal piece off. Liquid oxygen should be stored in a cool, well-ventilated place. Sometimes that liquid O2 will vent off a little extra that's built up there, so it, again, needs a cool, well-ventilated place. And contain and store cylinder supply systems in whatever room or enclosure you want to call it, but one that's well-ventilated and constructed of material that at least has 1 hour fire resistance. You know, in a hospital, there's the walls that have, fire resistance. There's the doors that would close that provide a level of fire resistance, whether it's an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours, just depending on the material. The oxygen should be kept in some sort of area that, again, could be enclosed, protected. And the reason just an hour, why not 24 hours? That at least gives fire department time to get in there and then address the situation. Heaven forbid any of that would ever happen, and I would hope it would never. But again, it's part of the recommendations. Cylinder transport. All right, when we're transporting cylinders, good idea to transport them in their own cart. Number one, I don't have to carry it. Again, they do have weight, and I don't want to carry them, and I don't want to get busy and then it slips out of my hand and falls, and again, could crack or be damaged. Plus, if it's in a cart, it's not going to typically fall over unless I physically decide I'm going to push it. Protect cylinders from striking other cylinders or objects, again, by keeping them in those carts, those storage carts. Avoid dropping, dragging, or rolling cylinders. And don't transport cylinders that are not labeled properly. Of course, we could look at the color of the cylinder and be able to identify what the gas is, but we should always read the label. If the label is coming off, things like that, then really that tank should be placed to the side and be replaced. Cylinders when they're in use. So make sure if we have cylinders at the patient's bedside that they're secured somehow, whether it's in a cart, whether it's in the bed. Usually somewhere on the bed there's a location where, especially E-cylinders, because we use them most of the time for transport, that there's a place those cylinders can go, a special place. It's the design, and nobody ever asked me what I thought about the design, but when you have an E-cylinder, the bottom of the E-cylinder is flat. And if you were to place it on the floor, it will stand upright by itself. Now, it doesn't take much for you to push and knock an E-cylinder over. So it's never, now I'm spilling all that liquid out, sorry. We should never just sit a tank upright. It needs to be secured. It needs to be placed in some sort of storage or holding compartment or container. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a patient's room. I'm seeing that patient, we're getting ready to do therapy. The patient had gone on a trip somewhere, road trip. They've come back in the room. Whoever went on the trip with them just left the tank in the room and left it perfectly balanced, sitting in the middle of the room or over on the side of the room somewhere. That's a hazard. That's a hazard. If I have nothing else, I usually don't carry rolling carts with me, but if anything else, I'll take that tank and move it over next to the wall, and I'll lay it down until I can go get a cart. Now, that being said, sometimes you will find the rooms, our patients' hospital rooms, are not evenly level. I put a tank over in the corner, and over a couple of minutes, the tank starts rolling across the room. Well, dang it, that wasn't my intention. But just to get it out of the way, so somebody doesn't accidentally bump up against it and cause it to fall over. Do not use flammable materials on the tanks or the regulators or any attachments we put at the top. No grease, no oils, things that can potentially accentuate a fire. We will, what we call crack, again, that's the word we call, we will crack and open the yoke of the cylinder, and again, simply attaching our key, or maybe it comes with its own valve. We will crack it, meaning we will open it here. The gas will blast out of here as long as I keep that open. So what I mean when I say crack the cylinder is you open it, that will blow out any dust or debris that could have built up here, and then I will close it back. And then I'm able to attach my regulators to the top of these devices. But I always want to crack it first to blow out any dust or debris. When these things are brand new, these things are sealed. These things are closed. And so when you open it for the first time, you'll basically take some tape, take the tape off, or take the hard plastic piece off that's wrapped around it. I still want to crack it. I still want to make sure I blast any debris or dust out of that spot so it doesn't end up into my regulator, which can damage my regulators. Never use cylinder valves or regulators that need repair. Again, don't try to force, don't try to break, don't try to make things connect. If they're broken, they're broken. Set them to the side, get with our people in biomed to have them replaced. And again, it's not our job to fix it. We'll take it, quote unquote, out of service, so to speak, until it can be fixed or replaced. Again, never place cylinders near sources of heat. Again, remind your home care patients, hey, you have a fire here, don't place those cylinders, those tanks anywhere near that area. And when oxygen is in use, no smoking signs should be posted. Sometimes, and it's still a good rule of thumb to always make sure those signs are posted. I know sometimes we could say we don't have to post them in a hospital setting, because the second people enter the property of a hospital, there's signage, no smoking in this vicinity, on this property, in this building, on the grounds, etc. But I still think it's a good idea, just to, again, somebody's using oxygen, good idea to post those signs. Another thing, talking about these cylinders when they're in use, and I don't remember if I'm going to mention it at any other location, but I did want to say, an E-cylinder, that's the cylinder, it's about this big. It's the one we're going to use most often when we transport a patient. Anybody know how heavy those things are? When they're empty, they're around 8 pounds. When they're full of oxygen, when they're full of gas, it's about 14 pounds. So again, it's nothing you and I couldn't handle for a short period of time. But I still recommend having them in some sort of secured rolling cart or something like that when we're using it on a transport. If the patient's on the bed or stretcher, then finding the location on that bed or stretcher to place the cylinders. The H tanks, the big ones that are always found on some sort of wheeled cart, empty. Anybody know how heavy a H tank is? Go ahead and guess. It's over 100 pounds, empty. Full could be anywhere from 120, 130 pounds when it's full. So there's no way in the world we're going to be expected to lug those things around. Remember back in the early days, the first oxygen orderlies typically were men that would have to carry that stuff around. Again, they were heavy. All right, so this doesn't really go in a proper order here, so I apologize. I'm going to jump with the second bullet point here. When opening up the cylinder valve of high pressure tanks, make sure you open them slowly. Prevent any possible high pressure problems if you open them too quickly, okay? Second bullet point is never, 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 absolutely will not ever bring a metal oxygen tank into an MRI suite. Now, I will say this, as respiratory therapists, we don't go to MRI that often. Once in a while, probably in 12 months, maybe you've been there twice with the patient. It's not that often. So it's something we might not think about because we're hardly ever in there with the patient. But if we are in there with the patient, usually it's a patient who requires mechanical ventilation. And so they make us come along because we're operating, we're managing that ventilator. But to power that ventilator, maybe I have to have an oxygen tank to power the ventilator. If that's the case, I need to be aware, do not bring that metal oxygen tank cylinder into the MRI suite. Because what would happen? Anything metal would get sucked right into that magnet. Okay, that's just a chair, right? That's just a chair, and you can see how fast it flies up in there. And remember, that's where the patient's gonna be, right? Heaven forbid you had an oxygen tank, an E-cylinder that when full is about 14 pounds. Can you imagine flying through the air, getting sucked into that magnet? Has it ever happened? Sure has. It's happened multiple times, unfortunately. This was just one story I came across about a young boy who passed away because he was in the MRI, getting an MRI of his head. Someone left an E-cylinder over in the room somewhere, probably over in a corner somewhere, and when the magnet was turned on, it flew through the air, and you could read it, at 20 to 30 feet per second, fractured his skull. Ultimately, you can see the damage to the MRI machine here. Again, carelessness, people not paying attention. The staff that works in this area knows their equipment, knows their area. They're usually very cautious stopping us from coming into their area because, okay, do you have anything metal on you? Yeah, I got my watch, I got my keys, I got my stethoscope. Okay, all those things need to come off before you come in here. So usually they're very critical of people coming into their area, which I appreciate because that's their area. But stories like this tend to happen. It was the weekend, it was at night, the normal staff wasn't there, there was somebody, the RT, that doesn't go in there very often, you're not thinking about it, don't realize what that magnet can do. And so just be very careful anytime you're in the MRI suite area. You know, same your wallet, all your magnetized cards will get completely, now I can't work the gas pump anymore, I need to get new cards. So those things you have to make sure. And in those areas, there's lockers that you could store your stuff in, so nobody's gonna mess with your stuff. They even make mechanical ventilators that are compatible in the MRI, that have no metal components to them. So even the ventilators, we can't just bring any old ventilator in there with that patient. It has to be an MRI compatible ventilator. All right, cylinder safety. Now you don't have the next several slides I'm going to share, but just sit back and enjoy. These things are heavy. I can't help but think when I'm traveling on the interstate and I'm right next to a work truck that has multiple tanks on them that are secured, what would happen if somebody forgot to secure one of those or two of those or the whole set that's there? And they get up on the interstate and I'm tailgating, I'm right behind them, I'm trying to get to work, I'm trying to get around them, and these things were to fall off. Again, these are H tanks. Again, well over 100 pounds, well over 100 pounds. The damage it can cause to a vehicle, let alone us inside of them. I had a former student that was traveling down Chaffee Road one day, and this was before the First Coast Expressway was built, and he was going up Chaffee. And at the time, Chaffee, 2-lane road, ditch, trees and woods. He's going down a 2-lane road, him and his young son in the car seat. As he's looking ahead, there was some sort of work truck with all these tanks on them. And he sees the work truck start to fishtail. Again, this is at a great distance. Start to fishtail, and then it turned over on its side and starts flipping. He immediately slamming on his brakes, and there's nowhere for him to go because there's a ditch, woods. So he slows down as fast as he can. This was not his vehicle. He was in a car, but These things flying off the truck, boom, just tumbling end over end. I'm like, oh my gosh, my life would flash before my eyes. One of these tanks ended up perfect on the roof of his car. You could see he shared pictures. I should have said, and I didn't think about it at the time, hey, can you send me a copy of those? I would have shared them with you guys. But it actually indented the top of his car. Thankfully, he wasn't hurt, his son wasn't hurt, and that was the most important thing. I don't think anybody was hurt in the accident, but scary when you see tanks falling off these trucks. That's one of my worst nightmares if it would come to, something like this. We said last week that they have relief valves to helpfully vent off any excessive pressures, right? That if the temperature got too high in or around a tank, it would start to vent off some of that excessive pressures, because higher temperatures means higher pressures. And so any excessive pressures it would vent off. But I still said last week, I still would be concerned if a tank was left in a fire. Yes, it's gonna vent, but it's venting what? Probably more likely oxygen, which could explode. Oxygen tanks explode during a house fire. Where was this? This was in Maryland, Brooklyn Park, Maryland. Again, led to a house fire. So this could have been a patient who used oxygen in the home. I don't know what started the fire, but the fire started and then tanks began to explode. How about this ambulance? Ambulance catches fire after oxygen tank explodes. This was in Columbus, Nebraska. Yeah, look at the damage that can do. Someone decided to throw their old tanks that obviously had gas left inside them inside their trash. And I don't know if you can see this very well. That yoke is gone. You can see all the burn damage. This tank completely exploded, right? You can see the tank itself just exploding. All this sharp-edged metal. Not the same story here, but commercials. Sorry. How about here?
Workers had their day end with a bang Wednesday after a sudden explosion inside their truck in this Whitehall neighborhood.
Oxygen tank inside the garbage truck.
Blew up and sprayed everywhere. This is body camera video showing Whitehall police arriving to find the aftermath. They blame the blast on someone who tossed an oxygen tank in the trash on Elburn Avenue.
Definitely illegal and definitely dangerous.
The trash collectors employed by local waste services walking away with just scratches.
Fire. Fire started inside the truck too.
We're talking, serious injury or fatality.
Pieces of trash still scattered in the street and front lawns. Police say the explosion so loud, it set off Whitehall's gunshot detection system. Officers rush into the neighborhood, believing someone may have been shot.
Everybody went to that call because we weren't really sure what had happened at that point.
I thought it was gunshots personally.
Moments after the explosion, just watch as the back of the truck catches fire, and the crew springs into action to put out the flames. The waste company reminding everyone to always check labels and do not throw anything in the trash that's compressed, pressurized, or hazardous.
Tank, container of any sorts, aerosol cans, even household cleaning items, such as bleach or other solvents can be explosive. Batteries.
He's calling us boss. Boss, you won't believe what just happened.
A dangerous explosion right in their front yards.
Crazy. All right, don't have video here, but a man who was, I don't know because the man didn't survive. The man was gonna scrap the metal of an oxygen tank. I don't know where he got the tanks from. I don't know if he found them in the trash. I don't know if he had them or whatever, but he thought he would scrap the tanks. And there's video of him, I don't have the video, but there's video of him with an E-cylinder, and the yoke that's on the top, he's on the ground banging it off. I don't know why, I don't know what he was thinking he was gonna do, but banging it off, and there was obviously still gas inside that cylinder, and it exploded and killed him.
I have a question. So how do they safely dispose of them?
I was just gonna ask that.
Yeah, there's a whole process. to go. Now, someone with an e-cylinder, who brought it in the first place? Who would bring it? Who would bring it to the patient? The DME company, a home care company, they would be the ones to bring it. They would be the ones to come collect the empties and replace it with new full tanks. But whenever the patient is finished using them, that DME, durable medical equipment, or home care company would be responsible for then collecting those when it's all said and done. I do know there's patients who have now passed and their families left with all this stuff, and what do we do with it? Let's just throw it in the trash. Not the tanks, not the tanks. You need to call that home care company and say, hey, come get your stuff. Come get your stuff, because we have no use for it. But who knows? In those similar situations, somebody's left with an extra tank. Oh, what am I supposed to do with this tank now? Oh, I'll put it in the garage. Decades go by, somebody else now has the tank, and again, it ends up in someone's trash, or it ends up, in a scrap heap somewhere where somebody's trying to scrap the metal of that tank.
Question, what if you don't know what DME? Because I have 6 of them in my closet. My grandfather passed
Okay.
2 years ago, but we don't know.
That's a good question. I'll get some information from you and find out. But I would always say go to the home care company. But that's another one. You don't know who the home care company is. Let me ask. Let me reach out and find. Yeah. No sense having them, because again, it's just something that's in the way, something that's just there. But no, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that.
They're not labeled with the company. Like I know
Some
they
do,
have,
not necessarily, but some do, because I think of it like chlorine for your pool. Usually the company's name's on there where you used it from, but then I went and used the same company, but it's just in a different location, has their address on it now, but they usually do, but sometimes they don't. All right, how about this in a hospital setting? This is where not to store your e-cylinder during a transport. But those that work in a hospital, where do we put them? Just like that, right? But where are we supposed to put them? I heard some people say it. There's generally a spot right under the bed where these things will easily slide into, and then with our tubing, can obviously go around, snake to the patient or snake to the ambu bag or whatever. But where do we, in a rush, where do we throw them? Down there, and just use the rail here to hopefully, and the patient to kind of keep it stationary. Or at the foot of the bed. No, I've been there. I definitely know. And then we go, 100 miles an hour down the hall, because we got to get them to their location ASAP, especially if it's a patient who's been coding. And I get it. We want to get there quick. We're not on a Sunday stroll somewhere. We're trying to get there as soon as possible. Something else you may notice, if you are visiting an ICU and you look outside of the ICU, look at the walls, especially where there's turns and corners and angles. I bet you the wall about yay high is really beaten up. It's from when we go on transports and we push 100 miles an hour and we try to make a left-hand turn. Oh, took that one a little wide, bang into the wall. Oh well, it's not our problem. And move on to the next spot. Okay, so it is interesting sometimes you're walking to the hospital and dang, but it's rough on these walls. It's when we transport patients to and from, right? What is it, I'm sorry?
corner guards.
Yeah, yeah. How about this for safety? Just store it standing up. Okay, I guess there's nothing better. This is one of my personal favorites. I did not create this. I did not make this. People said, John, you made that up just to make it look. No, I wish I could say I did, but I didn't.
The only thing that made it better is if they used duct tape.
That would have made it better, and I'm not being sarcastic, that would have made it better. I think they used paper tape.
Yep.
Paper tape, and wrapped it to what was left of an old IV pole. All right. It's secured, kinda. It can hold 12 tanks. So what do you do with the extra one? You just throw it on top. What's one more? Yeah, just throw it on top. Again, start a new collection, a new holder, not just setting it up on top with who knows what other equipment. Just it's a table, kind of. The next video I'm going to share with you guys is something I posted this video actually in Canvas, and it's from a home care company. It's a home care company video of a maintenance worker working with an e-cylinder. And I'll let the video kind of go through and then we can talk about the rest. Sorry, it's kind of quiet.
The explosion occurred in the maintenance area of a home care company. As the story goes, the cylinder valve was defective, not open. The maintenance worker attempted to loosen the valve to a point that would allow oxygen to leak out of the cylinder. Okay, so the first set of slides here is the wrench the gentleman was using to take the valve off the cylinder, to show the valve. This is a chain device to hold the cylinder on the workbench. And when the cylinder exploded, it ripped the chain right off the device. And the cylinder bounced around here. The workbench. So on the workbench just happens to be the gentleman's watch.
What was left of his watch.
Not the watch.
That's where his severed arm ended up.
And this is a picture of where the cylinder valve and cylinder landed. Close up of
There's the yoke that's on top of the cylinder that he was trying to take off with a wrench. See, the threads are melted. There's a close-up. You can see where the threads are melted, burnt. Parts of the tank. You wonder what caused his arm to get severed? That shrapnel flying through the, yeah, there's a big chunk of it. What's left of the tank? Looking down inside the tank.
And where did the top of the cylinder go? Well, it embedded itself in the tank board on the wall across the building. The explosion was so hot that it melted inside of the top of the cylinder. And it also melted the threads where the cylinder valve
Okay, that was a video. Sorry, I don't know why the volume for some of these videos is so quiet, but I did post this in case you're curious. Probably hear the audio better if you're on your own device and pull it up to look at it. But yes, I don't know why. I don't know what the individual that was trying to take this thing apart was thinking, but he had secured the tank to a workbench. He had the wrench trying to take that yoke off. I bet you this tank was completely full, 2,200 PSI, as he's taking the threads of that yoke off. We should never, ever, 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 ever mess with that and try to take that apart. No, if it's defective, the company that brought that, even though we're a home care company, there's still a company that has to bring it to us, right? Even if we're a home care company, we still contract with another company to bring us those tanks. That should have been put to the side and given, hey, we can't get this to work. The oxygen's not coming out of this. Something's defective about it. They can deal with it. They can take it away. Shouldn't ever be something that we or a maintenance worker at our hospital tries to quote unquote fix or correct. Again, those things are under tremendous amounts of pressure.
Coming up this week on 1,000 Ways to Die.
Yeah, there you go, right. All right, bulk oxygen, all right, bulk oxygen. Used to meet the large oxygen needs of a hospital system, large healthcare facility. They can hold anywhere from 20,000 cubic feet of gas. Now, bulk oxygen can be stored in its gaseous form or as a liquid form, but liquid is the most common. Liquid oxygen. So next time you're at the hospital, somewhere on that property, outside of the hospital somewhere, you're going to see something like this. Large storage tank of O2. Liquid O2. Again, generally somewhere in the back, somewhere on the side. Yeah.
We were at UF, and we,
Jeremy actually lifted it up.
I actually lifted
on
it
his
up.
shoulders.
Like, like Latarsha showed us where the tank was. I'm like, hold up, let me get a picture real quick. Sarah got a picture of me like squatting down.
Oh, clever,
The way he sat
clever.
down his cup, though.
Clever.
He was like, what?
Nice, nice. I was wondering where you're going with it, that's all. That was the expression. So advantages of the bulk oxygen over portable cylinders. And I think it's obvious when you think about it. In a hospital, we use so much oxygen for our patients. Not practical to have to worry about running e-cylinders all over the place multiple times every single day. So initially it's expensive to construct this type of system, but far less expensive in the long run, far more economical in the long run. Less prone to interruption, because if all we're using is cylinders to support our facility, they're gonna run out, it's gonna empty, I'm gonna have to stop, take the patient off the oxygen temporarily, switch over, put them on oxygen, so it doesn't make sense for a large hospital system to run exclusively off portable cylinders.
More likely to have some dunce blow up the place too.
There you go, and again, all the issues that, dangers. Even though we still have a tremendous amount of e-cylinders in the hospital, but only really using those for transport type purposes. We don't have to have separate pressure reducing valves at each outlet if we have the main one. The safety standards for bulk oxygen systems set forth by the National Fire Protection Agency and potential local and building codes to set forth those particular standards and regulations. Now there's three types of bulk oxygen systems, three types. One type, an alternating supply system or cylinder manifold system, which usually consists of large cylinders like the H tank, for example, banked all together in unison. When the primary bank empties, it automatically converts over to the reserve bank. This was from the textbook, kind of showing a bank of H cylinders. Once those are empty, it can automatically be programmed to switch over to the reserve system. So obviously a system like this would be used when you need larger amounts of oxygen, but obviously you're not using them as frequently like we would in, say, a hospital type setting.
That's the type we have?
Speaking of which, that's what ours looks like. Behind the wall of our lab, this is our own oxygen manifold system. We have 6 H tanks back there feeding all the O2 that's going through our walls. Now, obviously, if we were to sit there and connect every flow meter we have to every single wall outlet and crank all the flows up as high as they can go, we will bleed through this supply very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. It's why we tend to be a little, I don't want to use the word strict, but we want to be practical. If we're showing off how to set up and turn on a nebulizer or a non-rebreather mask, we'll probably plug it into the compressed air that we have just to turn it on. But just remember, in a hospital setting, I'm not going to run a non-rebreather off of room air. I'm going to plug it into oxygen. But I just wanted to share what ours kind of looks like with you. Now, ours could automatically switch over. Now, I don't have ours set up to switch over. I want to know every time a cylinder is empty. And that's just for me to know when we're getting low. Right? When we're getting low and when we need to place an order for some new tanks and for them to come take the old tanks, the empty tanks.
So you have to, some places they do regular.
For every Monday,
Yeah.
they show up, or the first Monday of the month, they would show up, absolutely. But we use ours so inconsistently that we can never say that, every Monday of the month, go ahead and bring us 3 more. It just depends. We can go through this probably in one full, complete academic year. But sometimes we use a little bit more depending on what we're doing. Next semester when we do mechanical ventilation, we have multiple ventilators set up. We tend to go through it a little bit faster than we do, say, this semester. So it's just something that you will see. But notice, we're good. We make sure they are chained. to the wall. But yeah, this is just on the other side of our wall. Where those two beds are there in the lab, this is really just behind that wall. All right, another type, cylinder supply system with a reserve supply. Very similar to the previous one. Primary, secondary, and then a reserve supply. So really you kind of have an extra supply of gases. Now number 3 is what we talked about before, the large bulk liquid O2 that you would see in a hospital type setting, large healthcare facilities. Even like, and I used this the other day, even the freestanding Baptist ER that's right off of Dunn Avenue, they still go through lots of oxygen. They wouldn't function very long or very well with our type system. I guess they could, but they would need a lot more than 6 H tanks for that to work or for that to make sense. So they even have the bulk liquid O2. Again, it is an ER, so they can see the most critical patients. And so they definitely need to have enough O2 to supply. So the big bulk liquid O2, the big giant thermos that's there on the hospital grounds, outside the hospital walls themselves. This is what it looks like. Storing liquid oxygen inside that big giant container. Now, liquid, above it is gas, but where the liquid is, when it's pulled in, it goes through vaporizers to help warm the gas. Because when it is stored, negative 118.6 Celsius or negative 181.4 degrees Fahrenheit, super, super cold. If the temperature is allowed to climb higher, then liquid oxygen converts to a gas. So it converts from a liquid to a gas at temperatures just above this level. So when the liquid gas comes through, or when the liquid oxygen comes through, hits these vaporizer coils, it warms the gas. You know, it brings it up to ambient normal temperature in the environment. It doesn't have heaters on them or anything like that. But it will allow that cold liquid oxygen to warm. And it will then warm and convert from a liquid into a gas. And then that's what's going through our piped in walls. Chad, question?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
So when it's a liquid though, it's a larger, or it's a lower quantity, and then when it converts to the gas, it becomes a larger quantity, correct?
Liquid
mass.
Liquid oxygen
Yeah.
can convert to
A
much
larger,
more
yeah.
gaseous oxygen.
Okay, just
and
wanna
so
make
that's
sure
why
I'm
that's why it's more practical to
Yeah.
have, instead of having, I don't know, 12 of these big giant tanks
Yeah.
just holding gaseous oxygen, much more practical to have the liquid oxygen. And you may be on the grounds one time when you see a big Air Liquide truck or some of the other companies that are out there that really bring this big tanker truck and they plug in. And they're sending the liquid oxygen from the tank into one of these. And I don't know how frequently they visit the hospital, but I'm sure it's frequently enough, because we do go through, just imagine how much oxygen a hospital uses on any given day. And then there's pressure reducing valves to help reduce the pressure to 50 PSI. So that's what's coming through our piped in wall system. Again, what it would look like, and again, every hospital is different, the layout may be slightly different, but you can see the tanks, even a mini tank. You can see the vaporizer coils, where that extremely cold liquid gets converted into a gas. So what do you think forms on these coils? Condensation, which because the temperature is so cold, then you have ice. And so you could see something like this on the coils. Now, if you pay attention to the dates here, April 2020, September 2020, September 2020, January 2021, what was happening around that time? And how much oxygen was being used? A lot. A lot of ventilators, a lot of high flow cannulas, a lot of BiPAP, CPAP systems, plus just oxygen itself being used. And you can really see just how much ice had formed, how much oxygen they were using. This is a Cleveland Clinic Hospital, but it was actually one that was in Florida. I don't know where. I tried to research this. I went back to the article that I got this picture from, and they said it's a Cleveland Clinic Hospital in Florida. But the kind of the purpose of the article at the time, it was around 2022 that the article came out. The concern was, with so much ice forming, would it reduce the efficiency of the system, where maybe the oxygen wouldn't be able to warm as well? And they were having serious discussions that maybe they would need to bring in de-icing equipment to lessen the amount of ice formed. So when you are in our local hospitals and you're able to see where these things are, look back there. I bet you will see some ice forming. It's normal. It's normal to see ice forming on there. But that's why. Even if it's July in Florida and it's 110 degrees outside, you will still see ice forming on there. And why? Think about how cold the temperature is inside these tanks with that liquid O2. All right, so safety precautions. National Fire Protection Agency, here they are again. They set the standards for design, construction, placement, and use of bulk oxygen systems. Not the DOT, but be careful not to confuse the DOT with them. National Fire Protection Agency. If this system was to fail, obviously patients receiving oxygen would not be receiving it. And patients on ventilators would not be able to receive the pressures, the breaths from the ventilator. So facilities should always have secondary backup plans in place if the main system was to fail. Now it says staff. I wonder what staff this is, but I'll read it. Staff must be prepared to identify affected patients and move appropriate backup equipment to bedside, portable cylinders, bag mask resuscitators, etc., if necessary, to bypass the failed system. Now what staff are we talking about? That's us. That's us. And so heaven forbid we ever encounter a situation like that where the main system was to fail. Again, how many RT staff members are in the hospital, working in the hospital on a given day? Every hospital is different as far as the numbers go. Have you guys experienced the number of staff members on a day shift in the places you have visited? You might not even have noticed, or even any ever see the work assignment or work list and maybe names
I think you have was like 10 or 10.
at night?
Is that low?
That's low. That's a very low number for a big place like that. But you know, let's say it is 10, or let's say it's 20. Let's say it's a day we have lots of staff members. Let's say it's 20 in a 500, 600, 700 bed hospital. You can only go so fast and so many places at one time.
A friend of mine said that he's had nights where he's worked and there's been 3 at Memorial.
Sure.
And that's for the full floor, and then 2 dedicated to ICU.
Right. So, you know, if we have all these patients in the hospital that some are on oxygen, some aren't, but some are on oxygen, who should be the first ones we visit? Well, we're going to go to the ICUs first, right? Those are the patients on ventilators, can't breathe without it, to make sure they are working. And again, it could be, okay, we'll bag them. We'll be its own ventilator, but now I can't go and check on the other patients. You know, it's where we're going to pull other staff members. Hey, come with me. Bag him. You bag them. I'm going to check on the others. More staff. Come on. Let's go. Students, come on. You know, you can bag until we can get the system up and running. Heaven forbid we go through any extreme like that, but we have to be prepared for it. So distribution of regulation of medical gases. So primary function and distribution of regulation systems to deliver oxygen and air at the bedside at a working pressure. Workable level. And what's that pressure? 50 psi. 50 psi. Our equipment requires 50 psi to work. The central piping system is that network of piped in, again, hidden behind the wall, piped in systems that's carrying oxygen, air, and even vacuum throughout the entire facility. Obviously, every patient room is going to have access to this piped in system. The operating rooms, the ORs, some hallway areas may have access to this piped in system. Other procedural areas may actually get piped in gas going to them as well. There are warning systems to alarm if there's ever loss of pressure, which then we need to address, because if we lose pressure in the line, then that means there's going to be no oxygen to our patients that are connected to that same line. Zone valves are located throughout the system to help us separate or close off areas of gases if we need to do that, whether it's for maintenance or, heaven forbid, if it was a fire. So there's the zone valves. That's what a zone valve looks like. This green one, I forget what gas is in there, and this yellow one, I forget that one too. I always get them mixed up. The other is the vacuum, but you can see what those pressures are. If I was to pull this gauge, then I am closing off the oxygen going to that unit, that area, that part of the hospital. And you can see all that large tank, all that bulk liquid oxygen is outside the hospital. It is piped in, going through the ground floor, going through the basement even, where probably some of our backup secondary systems are, before those get spread up through the hospital. All right, so safety systems that are used to prevent misconnections. One of the greatest risks of using medical gases is giving the wrong gas to the patient. It would be one of the worst things. I think I'm giving oxygen, but instead I'm giving nitrous oxide. You know, I think I'm giving oxygen, I'm just giving helium instead. So what's that? So reading the cylinder label, extremely important. Colors of the tanks give us kind of a backup, but reading the labels, very important. But accidents do happen. People get busy, people get distracted. We're humans, we're prone to mistakes. So another system that has been developed would only allow connections to work with only certain gases. For example, you couldn't connect an oxygen flow meter to a tank of air, or you can't connect a nitrous flow meter, a nitrous connection, nitrous gas, to an air outlet, for example, to try to prevent misconnections. So that's what we developed, the index safety system, to prevent misconnections. So when you're connecting equipment, you're connecting the same sort of equipment together. It's only gonna fit together, the right equipment with the right gas.
Gas to a gas tank.
So to speak, right. So there's 4 different type of safety systems. The American Standard Safety System, the Pin Index Safety System, and the Diameter Index Safety System, or simply AS, PIS, and DIS.
Got that video, right?
Got that on video, absolutely.
Make it-
So the first one, the American Standard Safety System, is the threaded connections. There's going to be a threaded connection here to this tank of oxygen and this particular regulator or system. There's going to be threaded connections here at the top of the cylinder. Now these are for high pressure connections for large cylinders. Again, to prevent accidental misconnections to the patient. That's the American Standard Safety System. The Pin Index Safety System are for the small cylinders. Small meaning E cylinders on down. So E cylinder is considered the largest of the small cylinders that have that yoke type attachment that's on top of the cylinder itself. Okay, these are the pinholes. Now, depending on what the gas is, there's only certain pinholes that are open to allow the connections to that particular gas. So for example, oxygen is at the 2 and 5 location. The 2 and 5 locations are where the oxygen pinholes are. For air, it's at 1 and 5, where the pinhole locations are for air. And you can see the others. These are the ones I want you to know. Of course, there's multiple gases, there's many gases, there's many different pinhole locations, but these are the ones I want you to remember. Oxygen, air, and the 2 different types of heliox. Now, how it will look would be something like this. So oxygen we said is at 2 and 5. That's where those pinholes will be kept. So when you're connecting an oxygen regulator to an oxygen cylinder, those pinholes will be at the right location. If I have carbon dioxide and I try to connect an oxygen regulator, well, guess what's not going to fit? Because their pinholes are at 1 and 6, not at 2 and 5. So there's no way the connection for, say, an oxygen regulator would be able to connect to a tank of carbon dioxide. Physically impossible. You can see here. So here's the pinholes. There's our attachment. There's our regulator where the pinholes will fit perfectly.
Every time when they put a yoke on the wrong tank?
No.
Okay.
No. No. Because we're never taking the yoke off. We
I meant,
can't,
yeah.
right? So no. The regulator, again, there's the 2 pins. At what pinhole locations?
2 and 5.
2 and 5, which will connect perfectly to the yoke for a tank of oxygen. So they will connect. This part's kind of hand tighten that regulator up to the yoke itself. There's the oxygen key, or the tank key, that can fit directly on top. So now when I turn this, it will open the gas, and the gas will freely flow into my regulator. I can adjust the flow coming out of this regulator here on the side. Right now it's displaying 15, but I could turn it off, I could turn it to 1, I could turn it to 2, I could turn it to 15, I might be able to turn it to other flows, just depending on what my patient will need. Again, I could read the gauge here. When it's open, I believe right now it's closed, but when it's open, I will see this gauge go up to the pressure of the gas that's in the tank. Questions?
When you're not using it, should you?
Close it.
Yeah.
You should close it, absolutely. You should close it.
And will it
And what I
go
mean by
back
closing it
in?
is closing it here at the top. Because it will, if you were to leave it open, it will, even though you don't hear anything, it will leak out of this tank over time. That's why we always make sure we close it at the top when we're done using it.
And then when you do close it, will it go back down to 0 or will it stay at the pressure?
It will stay at the pressure, and what I always say is I'm gonna go ahead and bleed out the system. I'll turn the flow on, and whatever's left in here, that the pressure that's showing, once it bleeds out, you'll see this gauge go right back to 0, once I bleed it out of the system. And that's how I like to leave it, so when somebody else walks up to it, they can look at it and go, oh, it's either empty or it's closed. Up here at the top, it's closed. And I could turn it on at the top and see the pressure go up to whatever the pressure is. That's a good question. All right, and the last one here, diameter index safety system. Used for low pressure connections. Again, what I simply would say, these are the quick connects. The things you're kind of plugging into the wall, you're plugging into a gas source, you're plugging it directly into the tank. These are the quick connections. Diameter index safety system. I know it's difficult to see these. These I actually stole from an anesthesia presentation because they deal with gases too. Notice the different number of threads, the size, opening, depth of this would only allow things to be connected that they're supposed to be connected to. If you look, and again, some of our hospitals may have some flow meter outlets that look like this. I like this one just for the visual because you can see it. The one we have in the lab's a little bit different sort of setup. It's a little bit harder to see. It's not quite as obvious as this one is. But if I have an oxygen flow meter, okay, oxygen flow meter, what color is the oxygen flow meter?
Green.
Green. Oxygen flow meter, I would not be able to connect it here because of the quick connect. The setup, and I don't want to use the term pins because this is not the pin index safety system, it's diameter, but the pins are located directly one on top of the other, like it shows here. If I try to connect that same oxygen flow meter, guess what? It wouldn't connect. It wouldn't connect. It might try to connect at the top, but there's nowhere for the second one to go. Okay? That's, again, to prevent misconnections between flow meters, between regulators, between the attachments. All right, so things about regulating pressure or flow. If the goal is solely to reduce gas pressure, then we deal with a reducing valve. that's gonna reduce the pressure. If I'm trying to control gas flow, that's when we use a flow meter. If I'm trying to control both pressure and flow, that's when we use a regulator. A regulator shows both pressure and flow. God bless you. All right, so flow meters. Believe it or not, there's different types of flow meters. Again, we're pretty comfortable with one type, I'm sure, that we plug into the wall outlet. That's one type, but there's other types as well. The first one is a flow restrictor. You see these once in a while, not that often to be honest with you, but what a flow restrictor is, and it's the simplest and least expensive of the flow meters, inside of it, there's only a certain opening that allows a very certain specific amount of gas to go through. You can't adjust it. That's why it's something you might not see that often. You could see it sometimes, but generally not that often. So if I grab a flow restrictor flow meter, I would have to read the label. What is the liter flow that's coming out of this thing? And let's just say we grab one and it says 5 liters. Okay? You plug it into the wall, what's coming out of there? What's coming out of that wall outlet? 5 liters. But what if the patient needs 2 liters? Tough, they can't. What's coming out of there is 5 liters. You cannot change it. You cannot adjust it.
So it's like a similar concept to the Benny mask with all the different pieces for different.
It's
flows?
different than the Venturi mask, yes.
Is this something that you would most likely see in home care, so that way it's not?
No, because they're not gonna have a quick connect system in a home situation.
You're right, when you put a
It's okay, it's fine. Yeah, I'm just thinking, they're not gonna have the wall outlet, right, that we have in a hospital.
Right.
Is there a certain type of patient you would use this on, or is it just like a random thing? that we
Certain
have?
again, that's why you don't see it that often, right? Because it's not practical. You can't change the flow. But let's just say, our hospital got some, and they're oxygen, flow restrictor, flow meter, and they're programmed at 15 liters. 15 liters. Now, I'm not going to put a patient on a non-rebreather, or excuse me, a nasal cannula at 15 liters. I'll go through the devices in my head. But the 15 liter, what if it's a code? And I need to connect a resuscitation bag. And we'll go to codes, and we'll walk into the patient's room going, where's the damn flow meter? Isn't every room supposed to have its own flow meter? You're supposed to, but sometimes somebody takes the flow meter out of this room to go use on this patient, and now this room doesn't have a flow meter, and until something happens that we need it, then we don't realize it. But what if I had a flow restrictor flow meter at 15 liters? I carry it wherever I go, it's in my pocket. I get into that same situation, I plug it in, I can connect my ambu bag to it, it's running at 15 liters, there's no reason to change it, okay? Okay, so only for specific liter flows. Go ahead, Joe.
They better go get a regulator, cause I'm taking that thing back. I ain't leaving with them. They better find a regulator when they
Yeah, but
get more stable.
of course, but it's something you generally don't see. You know, for oxygen, generally don't see, because again, you can't change the flow. You'd have a million different ones. Is this one's 3? This one's 4. Anybody need 4? I got a 2 over here. Just it's not practical. It's not practical. But where you could possibly, where I would say, I'd like to have one of these with me at all times. What gas do you think is going through this one? Air. This one is designed to deliver 6 to 7 liters a minute. 6 to 7 liters of air a minute. If you had one of these in your pocket, you're going to give breathing treatments. Guess what you don't have to take the patient off of? You don't have to fiddle, you don't have to mess with their oxygen. You have one of these, that's going to power the nebulizer, 6 to 7 liters, that's what my nebulizers can run off of. Give my treatment, that's fine, finished, okay, I'm taking this with me. This is staying in my pocket. This was mine. I have 2 of them that I still to this day, I'm not giving those up. Because they're perfect for treatments. You know, and again, what do we say about breathing treatments? Do they have to be given with oxygen? No, they need a compressed gas source. So, sure, pretty much supposed to be every patient room generally has an oxygen flow meter. Generally. I know sometimes they go missing, but generally. How many have an airflow meter? Once in a while you may see one here or there. And so I don't have the time to go looking for an airflow meter, and I don't want to carry a big airflow meter in my pocket all day long when I can carry something that's this big. And so, yes, this is something I would never leave sitting down because it's going to disappear. And another respiratory therapist is going to snag it and take it up going, great, I got a flow meter for my treatments now. That's a flow restrictor flow meter. It only provides pretty much a specific given flow that you cannot change. The board-on gauge, it's a flow meter that's in combination with a pressure reducing valve. So you can adjust flow, you can change flow, and it will and actually it's measuring pressure. It converts it to a flow, but it's really measuring pressure. And what a board-on gauge is most, probably the best use of a board-on gauge is during a patient transport. If you think about your standard regular flow meter, okay, has that tube, and what's that little thing that goes up and down that you can turn the dial and make go higher or make go lower? That little float. If I'm on a transport and that's all I have to dial in whatever liter flow, and think about that float. If I turn that flow meter to the side, where's that float going to go? It's just going to roll. What's going on? It's just going to roll because of gravity. I'm glad we don't have a test today. It's just going to roll because of gravity. So the problem with that is now I don't know what the flow is. Okay, if I'm using a standard regular flow meter, and if I'm on a transport, and that flow meter was to lie on its side or lie upside down, a board-on gauge is going to read accurately no matter what. I'll talk louder. The board-on gauge will read correctly no matter what position it's in. That's why it's most commonly used for a patient transport. Patient transport. And so when you're going on a patient transport, what flow meter would be best? The board-on gauge flow meter. Now the Thorpe tube, that's the flow meter you're accustomed to seeing. And yes, we typically don't call it the Thorpe tube flow meter, we just call it a flow meter. But if you ever see that term Thorpe tube used on the board exam, don't think they're trying to be tricky. That's the official name of the standard flow meter that we're used to seeing, that we're used to plugging into the wall outlet, turning on the liter flow, seeing where that float is hovering, and then that's the liter flow that's being provided. Sorry, third bullet point, I'm looking at this going, is a taped transparent tube. I don't know what the heck a taped transparent, that's supposed to read tapered. Sorry, tapered transparent tube. Sorry, my typo. Tapered transparent tube. And there's two types of Thorpe tubes, a pressure compensated and an unpressure compensated, God bless you, Thorpe tube. We only use pressure compensated. I'm not going to even ask that question. It used to be an old MBRC board exam question to throw people off with. I'm not going to ask that question, but just in case it ever comes up later, pressure compensated Thorpe tube is the type we use in a medical or hospital type situation. All right, so if I was to back up and say 10 years ago, 12 years ago, maybe it's more like 15 now, but the time flies. When we would go on a patient transport, the student, you guys, would have to go find a tank. You would also have to find a regulator, and you would have to attach it to the tank. You'd have to crack the tank, blow out dust or debris, close the tank, attach your regulator, tighten it on there really good, make sure there was no leaks, and then, okay, we're good for a patient transport. And when we would be done, the next time we would have to go on a transport, we needed a brand new tank, we'd have to take that same regulator off that tank system and put it on a new one and go through the whole process again. It was time consuming, and students, you were forced to kind of have to practice putting these things on and off, on and off, on and off, these regulators to these tanks. Well, that creates delays. We would, not intentionally, but we would damage the regulators by taking them on and off over time. We drop them. They're made out of metal, but they would still hit the floor and sometimes break or warp or things like that. So probably a good solid 15 years ago, they came up with a system like this. Sometimes you may hear the term a grab and go system. It has a permanent regulator that displays pressure, that also displays, we can dial in a flow, that's permanently attached to the tank. We are never taking this off. And so every tank, typically in a hospital setting, has something like this already, that we do not have to take this part off.
Is that an E-tank?
It's an E-tank. It's connected to an E-tank, which makes it very simple, very easy, very practical. When we go on a transport, grab one of these things, the whole thing with us. I could sit there and see how much pressure is inside the tank. I could turn the dial to whatever liter flow, and whatever liter flow is going to come out of here. If I'm going on a transport with my vent patient and I need to plug this in, my Quick Connect, Quick Connects can work here on the side, and so I still can have my tank connected to my ventilator connection. And it makes it very simple, very practical, very easy. And we get spoiled with a system like this, because now there's no more need for separate tanks and board-on gauge regulators or oxygen keys or wrenches to open up and close those tanks with. Now I want to say, all of this stuff is not eliminated. There are tanks that don't have these on them that you will see and you will encounter a little less frequently than you would these. You'd see these all the time in a hospital setting. But in a patient's home, guess what type they don't have? They typically don't have something like this. So again, you may still have to teach a patient how to attach a regulator, how to move a regulator from this tank to this one. Because usually they're not given regulators for all the tanks that they have. With their own key to be able to go back and forth to switch the regulators on a tank. So because we're going to see this most often, absolutely, and it's going to be very easy for us, we can't forget there's going to be times we will encounter what I now call the old school way before we had these things. You could still see that in a hospital setting, infrequently, but you could also see that in a home care type situation. Some of them are even so fancy, and I'm almost afraid to even share this with you. Some of them are so fancy that there's now a digital display of how much pressure is in there. And if you know what button to press, and you have a liter flow going, it may even tell you how much more time is left. Now guess what? You're still gonna have to know cylinder duration, so don't get too excited, right? You're still gonna have to learn cylinder duration, but some of them, and not all of them have this, but some of them do. Again, which makes it very convenient, very easy for us. And for us is one thing, but also easy for the patient. Because I can't tell you how many times you could teach a patient how to calculate their own flow, or give them you can even give them kind of a chart to give them a general idea. They don't have to necessarily be so specific like I'm doing when I test you guys. How long will this last to the second? But it's hard for some patients to be able to do that, to know that, how long will it last. My father, in his last year of life, he was on home oxygen. I taught him how to switch his tank, not this thing, but how to switch his regulator out, how to calculate duration. And he said, I'm kind of like a respiratory therapist now, John, right? Am I? I'm like, you're absolutely a respiratory therapist, Dad. Go ahead. And he was so proud of himself because he could switch those regulators on those tanks. And of course, initially he was afraid and scared that something's bad going to happen. I'm like, no, Dad, you're fine. I'm with you. We're going to do this together umpteen times. I don't care until you get comfortable. And once he got comfortable, then he was fine. He was on his own then at that point. Questions? This is the last part of chapter, was it 41? Part 2.
Is that way more expensive for hospitals and to have?
What, something like this? To be honest, I've never researched the expense of it. I would say no, it must not be more expensive, because all the hospitals are going to a system like this, more of an analog display, not the digital display. You generally won't see these in a hospital setting, but something like this you would, and you want 2 liters, turn it to 2 liters. Well, how long is it gonna last? Hold on, I need my calculator. It's an E-cylinder, so I know the factor, I know the pressure. Let me multiply that together. I'll divide it by my flow. Okay, there's my answer in minutes as far as how long it will last. But I think for The ease of use, it's very simple. And I think it could get expensive if a hospital had to keep buying regulators that break, that get damaged. We throw them in the bin with the other regulators, and you hear all that metal on metal just banging together. I'm sure that's not good for that stuff. Or I drop them on the floor, or we go on a transport and I drop it during the transport, trying to get it back on there. The tank keys were like gold at one point. And I remember when I would take students to the hospital, we'd go into the equipment room, I'd show them where a few things are, and I'd reach in the key bin. Everybody gets their own key. Everybody gets their own key, just so you have it in case of emergency, and you're there with the tank and you can't get the tank open because nobody knows where the key is. You have one in your own pocket. You know, that's what I would do with my students. But now with these, you don't have to even worry about carrying a key or having a wrench or something like that to be able to open the top of the yoke, open the top of the tank.
You know, some trauma shares will have like a little cutout for it too.
Yeah. Kind of clever different ways to be able to still have access to be able to open those tanks. Some of them even come with their own little piece on the top that you can actually turn, which that makes total sense. Why do we have to worry about finding a key and when it could just have a piece on the top that you can turn? But not all of them are like that. All right, let me give you a couple of questions here and then we can go. All right, you're called to prepare an e-cylinder of oxygen for a patient. Which pinhole locations on a regulator would be used here? Is that 1 and 5, 2 and 5, 2 and 6, 1 and 6?
2 and 5.
2 and 5, are you sure?
Yes.
Okay, yes. It is 2 and 5 for oxygen. 2 and 5 for oxygen. Everybody snap that picture okay? All right, so it's B, 2 and 5. Next question. A patient on a nasal cannula needs to be transported on a stretcher. The O2 cylinder used is laid flat under the stretcher. Which flow meter should be recommended? Compensated Thorpe tube, flow restrictor, board on, or you can't transport a patient on oxygen, boo-hoo. The board on. The board on. Board on type flow meter. Because it's going to read accurate no matter what position it's in. The Thorpe tube flow meter, again, it's not going to read accurate if it's lying down. That little ball that's inside that flow meter will just follow gravity and go wherever it is if you're lying it down. All right. And last question, what patient safety hazards can you find in the following picture? All right, so yeah, let's go for it. Cigarette.
Petroleum gel.
Cigarette right next to their oxygen tank. Petroleum gel, which if they use it to try to make this go on smoother or easier, that's a fire hazard. Same thing, patients should not, I understand patients sometimes can get a little irritated by the cannula or by the gas flow, so maybe a little Vaseline on, not if they're wearing oxygen. Again, another fire hazard. So the cigarettes, that, never put your remote there between the cushions.
Standing up
No
without.
car.
It's not secured. It's not secured. So yeah, so those three things in particular, I think, is all we can really see here on this picture. The tank is not secured. Tank is not secured. And obviously, clearly, they must have been smoking while they're wearing their oxygen.
It might have been that house before that lady burned.
There you go. Right before the explosion. Yep. All right. Any questions you guys have for me? No? All right. So that finishes chapter 41. Chapter 42 that we'll be doing starting on Wednesday is all about the O2 devices. I know Desmond's gone over some of the O2 devices with you guys. We will go over those same devices plus everything else related to medical gas therapy, oxygen therapy, and the different interfaces. I got 2 parts to that chapter, chapter 42. I don't have to cover cylinder duration because we did that here. So that's a good thing. But everything about oxygen, including indications, hazards. I know you probably were taught some of that, right? Which is fine. But indications, hazards, plus everything about those devices. Now, about those devices. Don't those devices deliver different concentrations of oxygen? Yep, you're going to have to know every one of those concentrations of oxygen for each of those devices. Don't those devices require certain leader flows for them to work or function? You're gonna have to know every one of those leader flows for those different devices, okay? That has to be in your wheelhouse. When people ask us in the hospital questions about OSHA devices, and they're not sure, who are they gonna call on? The respiratory therapist. So you have to know everything about those devices. Why one device should be chosen over another device. Of course, there's some devices that are more popular than others. We'll go over, but we'll still go over all of them. Even the ones that are not so popular, we'll still go over them. Because you could potentially encounter them at some point, or people like me or the MBRC will still ask you questions about those other devices that you see once in a while. Not very often, but once in a while. All right, what questions you guys have for me?
When do you want us back?
I had, it's 11. It's 10:52 right now. Would 11:30 be an okay starting time? Okay, let's do 11:30. Let's do 11:30.